Welcome to Rail Families United, where we aim to build strong ties through some very hard truths. I'm the mother of a frontline rail worker, and over the years, I've noticed the rail industry just get exponentially more dangerous. And unfortunately, rail workers are not allowed to talk to the press for fear of losing their jobs. They are constantly threatened with the loss of their jobs. And so, given the one time it could have been my child that was killed on a night instead of a friend and coworker, I decided to start investigating the issues behind what is making the rail industry so dangerous today. And this led me on an over 3 solid years of research. And what I have discovered, I'm now ready to share because regulators are turning a blind eye to so many issues, and that too, in and of itself, is part of the problem. So come along for the ride, and it's sure to be one in which you will not be bored. Although the issues that we're going to discuss on this website originated in Canada, the fact is that many of the key players involved in the issues we're going to be discussing have escaped to be top executives in the U.S. rail industry. And so this is no longer just a Canada issue. It is an issue that absolutely involves the entire U.S. rail industry. And as we get into this, you'll see more and more why that is. So just so you know, the U.S. rail unions, the big ones, and I'll do a separate video on the unions. They've been provided with a lot of information too, because this impacts frontline lives in both Canada and the U.S. And so let's just get started with what one of the major problems is in the rail industry today. And that is the fact that when there's an accident, we are we're paying for reports and investigations, including death investigations, that have a lot to be desired as far as what they're revealing and what they are telling the public. So when you get a railway investigation report, you go to Transport Canada and you can download all the investigation reports that they have completed. And those can take years, literally, to complete. And there's a good reason for that. And I think the best reason is really because it takes a lot of time to coordinate a lot of lies. So let me just show you the one investigation report that I focused solidly on for 3 years was the death of a conductor trainee in Saskatchewan. And when there had been another death in Saskatchewan that prompted me to go back and look into this one, because I had been aware of this one. This conductor trainee had died when my child was also a conductor trainee at the same time as this particular individual. And so I knew of this death. Then a few years later, this other employee dies about 4 years later. And so I knew it would take a long time for this other employee's reports to come out. And that other employee could have been my child that night. I didn't sleep for 2 years after that particular rail employee died because that one hit entirely too close to home. And so I went back knowing about this particular conductor trainee who had died. The odd thing was when this person died, I was with my child out west in Canada. And I didn't know this particular conductor trainee. But again, he was a conductor trainee at the same time as my child. But what happened when my child found out about this death in the field? I was there when the phone call came in from another conductor trainee. And so all the conductor trainees, they basically went to class together. There's only a couple of training centers in Canada. I think one's in Winnipeg and the other one's in Edmonton. And so if you're, in the west, there's the west and there's the east in Canada. You're either on the west side, which goes from British Columbia to Thunder Bay, Ontario, and then there's another from Thunder Bay, Ontario out to the East Coast. That's considered the East. And so if you're assigned to the West and you're a conductor trainee, depending on where you work, these people get to know one another, or they know of each other. They know who's being trained in the field on what day, who's being qualified in the field to get their certifications as a conductor, and so on. And so when this one particular conductor trainee was killed, I was there when that call came in, and I had such an odd reaction to that call. I had like shivers up and down my spine, and I didn't know why I was reacting that way, because I had this sensation that something is really wrong here. But I didn't know this particular guy, and so I didn't think anything of it until the next person died. And that one hit extremely close to home and could have been my child that night instead of a friend and coworker. And so I went back, and by then I could find the reports on conductor trainee Jason Clooney, who had been killed in the area of Tisdale, Saskatchewan. Who's going to care about a conductor trainee killed in the middle of a wheat field in Saskatchewan? Probably nobody other than the family. And he would have been long forgotten by the time I pulled up his reports. And again, there's the Railway Investigation Report that comes out from the Transportation Safety Board. There's the Transport Canada Health and Safety Officer investigation and report. And then there was also an Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal hearing into the death of this particular conductor trainee. And again, all these things, they take years to finalize and go through. But when this one person died in Saskatchewan again, this one was a conductor at CN Rail, and that could have been my child that night. I went back and I looked and pulled up the investigation report from the Transportation Safety Board for conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Now, one thing I haven't told you is the fact that my father used to be a coroner in the province of Ontario. And we were 10 children, and we were raised, you know what? Families have a right to the truth. No matter how ugly that truth may be, families have a right to the truth when someone dies. And so let us see just how honest regulators are when a rail worker dies. What I have in front of me here is the investigation report for conductor trainee Jason Clooney. The first thing to notice in these investigation reports is that regulators hide behind anonymity. You will not get to know the names of the players who were involved in a person's death. And so it makes it a lot harder to get to the truth. You can't find out who the actual witnesses are, who was the yard master on duty if it happened in a rail yard, who was the train master. You can't find out who the trainers were for a particular conductor trainee. You can't find out anything. The names are not provided in any report. And I can understand that to a certain extent in order to protect people. But the problem becomes, what if, if you dig deeper, there were bigger issues and they were hidden by rail carriers and regulators. And, when somebody dies, rail workers, frontline, these are the people you work with every day or, on a fairly frequent basis. And so when somebody dies, I think rail carriers, quite frankly, and regulators make the frontline rail workers think, we're going to protect you, we'll shield you from this. When, if you dig deeper, I think you would find that there are some serious issues that are really leading to deaths in the rail industry, and those get all covered up, while rail workers then have to maybe live with the guilt of knowing, well, maybe this wasn't quite right in this investigation report that they may read, but they can't say anything because they're being protected and shielded. So we're going to look into these issues, And the first thing I want to show you, and this is just what I call my visual file. Again, for this particular death, I'm probably up to 5-inch binders and a lot more files, like thousands of pages of files separate from the binders, because I requested all information I could get my hands on through Freedom of Information for the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And so there's a lot more than what I'm showing you, but I wanted to create this particular visual to show people when you get an investigation report, wow, these are the authorities, these are the experts, so we must trust them, right? Wrong. So here's the railway investigation report tied to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Okay? Now, I'm just going to show you real quickly here as we scroll through this report. It's only about 20-some pages. How many issues I found with this particular report. So here we go. This is page, well, technically page 2, but I'm just going to show you. Here we go. Anything in red is an issue with this report. And again, this is what I've found. This is only one report, and I went through at least 3 reports, one by the Transportation Safety Board, one by Transport Canada, and one with the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada. And I can tell you, every one of these reports has massive, massive problems as far as all the lies and the deceptions that are being handed over as investigation reports to taxpayers who have paid for what I call garbage investigation reports and investigations and garbage hearings also through the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada. And again, even though this particular person died in Canada, many of the players, and I'm talking high-level players at CN Rail, are now in the U.S. rail industry, including the Chief Operations Officer, who was there when conductor trainee Jason Clooney died. That's a man by the name of Jim Vena. He is now the CEO of Union Pacific. There is also the former CEO of CN Rail, who also now plays a major role in the U.S. rail industry. His name is Claude Mongeau. Claude Mongeau is now the chairman of the board at Norfolk Southern. Do we remember Norfolk Southern? Norfolk Southern is the company that had the East Palestine derailment. Devastated that town. And that's in Ohio. And J.D. Vance was a senator from Ohio. So issues such as East Palestine, I'm sure will be near and dear to the heart of J.D. Vance, especially given what this website will reveal when it comes to investigation reports in the rail industry in Canada. And especially given some of these players have been allowed to escape any accountability by escaping to the U.S. And those are just 2 people that I'm mentioning that are very high up. There are clearly others who were part of the problem in the Canadian rail industry, and they now run or are very high up in other rail companies, either at CP or at, other companies in the U.S. And so when you allow these types of issues to be hidden and regulators turn a blind eye to so much, well, this is breach of public trust, folks. And breach of public trust, even by regulators and politicians, folks, that is a criminal offense for which you can go to jail. And we're talking, and you know, there's other issues that will come into play here because along with breach of public trust, you have financial fraud and other issues that need to be addressed in all of this. When you let investors think that companies are so much better than they really are, and that they're not a high risk, and you hide material facts, that too can fall under financial fraud. I'm an ME in finance also, by the way, and so I understood very well the implications of what I uncovered over several years. And I'm now ready to disclose all of these things to rail families because, like I said, I was raised that people have a right to the truth, especially when a loved one is killed. And so I have zero pity for people who have been a party to hiding so many issues. And you know, I also studied, in addition to being an ME in finance, I also studied technical writing and up to the master's level. And so, and in addition, I worked with attorneys in the U.S. I am born in Canada, but I am a naturalized U.S. citizen. And I love the people of the U.S. as much as I love the people of Canada. And all of them have the right to the truth. So when I found out what I found out, I took steps in order to ensure that this information gets to who needs to get it. Now, I'm starting to do videos. People like videos. They like to just sit there after a hard day and listen, and that's fine. But given, you know, the goal of my website is to share a lot of critical information, I'm not going to focus on making it a perfect video. In all cases, that's not my goal. If you're looking for perfection, you're not going to find it here. If you're looking for information, you will absolutely find it here. So, you know, you'll have to live with the everything's not a perfect video, but I'm sure you will not be bored. You're about to embark on a roller coaster ride unlike any other when it comes to the rail industry. So, welcome aboard, and let's hope we can build those strong ties to force change in the rail industry in both Canada and the U.S. Now, when there's an incident in the transportation sector, as in this case where there was a death at CN Rail of a conductor trainee, the Transportation Safety Board does an investigation and then they send a copy of their preliminary or draft report to the rail carrier involved for their review. And so in this case, you can see that from the information I received via an access to information request, I was provided with a letter to Claude Mongeau, who was the CEO of CN Rail at the time, showing that he was the person contacted by the Transportation Safety Board to review the railway investigation report pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Now, you're going to note here that at the time there was a person at Transport Canada Programs who was a deputy minister. His name was Pierre-Marc Mongeau in 2013. Now, I just happened to notice the same name. I don't know whether or not they were related, but I did want to flag that one, just in case they are, because there are a lot of conflicts of interest. Not saying that that's a particular one, that it is a confirmed one, just an issue for people to be aware of. But Claude Mongeau, again, was sent the draft railway investigation report pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. Now, you'll note here in the regarding section on this letter that the date here is the 19th of November 2013. Above it says draft investigation report R for rail. 13 is the year it happened. W, I guess, means for worker, and then the report number. So R13W0260 was the report tied to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney near Tisdale, Saskatchewan. Now, the date shown there is November 19th, 2013. That's not the date on which this letter was sent. That is the supposed date of the incident. Now, here's the problem with that. Conductor trainee Jason Clooney died on November 18th, not November 19th. So, a couple of issues that could be going on here too. And I used to work with programmers. Okay, fine, maybe it's an honest mistake, but I'll tell you something else that it could be. Because there's so much deception that goes on. By inputting a wrong date for the death of someone, that's a great way to hide information in systems and databases, because when you pull up all information pertaining to a death that occurred on November 18th, 2013, records like this would not be pulled up. It's got the wrong date. So that's a huge issue, and I bring it up only because I used to work with up to 15 programmers a day in Chicago, and issues like this really stand out for me, especially when I see so much deception as we have seen in the case of the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And the other thing I wanted to show you here on this is that this also states that a lot of the safety issues under consideration will not be included in the final report. Why not? If there are safety issues that had to be considered because of the result of this investigation, why would that not be in the final report? Why is that hidden from taxpayers? And also, you've got here where it says that, you know, I just have to read that whole paragraph because to me it's just too good. It says, the board aims to make its report public in the shortest time possible. That is consistent with ensuring procedural fairness and development of a report with sound findings and recommendations. Sound findings are based upon accurate information and well-reasoned analysis. So, where I previously showed you my issues with the final report as I went through those 20-some pages all marked up in red, and that, folks, is just the tip of the iceberg as far as my issues pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. That report was created, that final report was created by the Transportation Safety Board with accuracy and sound reasoning kept in mind. And so if Claude Mongeau signed off on the draft report as the CEO of CN Rail and provided his input, and I have a copy of both the draft and the final report, so I could compare them, and we'll get through that in other videos on this channel to look at all the good stuff because it's just so rich. If he signed off on the draft report, the chances are that they probably get to review the final report before it goes out too, but we know for sure they reviewed the draft and provided their input, and that what they provided was supposed to, you know, be comments which would have been sound and accurate for the final report in order to further rail safety for other rail workers so that we can learn from our mistakes when somebody gets killed in the Canadian rail industry. So again, it was Claude Mongeau, who was the CEO of CN Rail and who was asked by the Transportation Safety Board to review the death investigation report tied to the death of Jason Clooney. Claude Mongeau was the CEO, and I suspect this report was likely also provided to the VP of Law at CN Rail for proper review, because the fact that you're a CEO doesn't make you a legal expert. And so it's just a hunch or opinion on my part, but I suspect that the legal department at CN also had the opportunity to review this for the CEO and provide its input, etc., for accuracy and sound, how do they word that? Sound findings. Um, you know, you have to laugh because you'd be crying through this whole friggin' thing. I spent years crying, as I am sure the family of conductor Jason Clooney did also, as I dragged them through over 3 years of sheer hell. Excuse me, I guess I'm not supposed to say that. As I dragged them through 3 years of pure torture, as I exposed issues tied to the death of their son. A whole lot of stuff that had been held from them. But anyways, there is, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, there is no way that Claude Mongeau, as the CEO of CN Rail, did not realize that laws were being seriously violated at CN Rail when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed. And again, we're going to get into that. And that the same could also be said of many other rail executives at CN Rail and other rail picks or rail partners in crime, as I like to call them, whether they're at the Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, the RCMP, the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada, and within other branches also of the Government of Canada, Ministers of Justice, which oversees the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal, the Ministers of Public Safety, the Prime Minister, all of them, you know, a lot of them were provided with my information as I analyzed all this stuff. And so for me, again, no excuse. Claude Mongeau, by the way, the former CEO of CN Rail, who signed off for the accuracy and the sound findings for this report, he's now chairman of the board at Norfolk Southern in the United States. The same company involved in the East Palestine, Ohio derailment. So again, if you are a rail worker on the front lines in the U.S., if you're a customer in the U.S. and you use Norfolk Southern as your rail carrier, if you're a rail investor, do you think maybe you'd be interested in knowing who is running that company and their level of integrity and whether or not they can be trusted with the lives of frontline rail workers or maybe the workers at customer locations, or whether they can be trusted with investor funds? There's a lot of issues tied to all of this stuff, folks, and so, like I said, this promises to be a most interesting roller coaster ride as far as the information that's going to be revealed on this channel. And again, I've got hundreds of pages that came to me via Freedom of Information and thousands of other pages of analysis. And so, you know, when you see just a few pages and you're already seeing this many issues, like I said, nobody is going to be bored on this channel. What I'm providing here is just the second page of that letter from the Transportation Safety Board asking Claude Mongeau to review the draft report pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And down at the bottom of the page here, you can see the page number, which was added for the documents which I was provided when I did the access to information request. They number all the pages themselves. So that's what those extra numbers are down there. They were added by the people who collated all the information for me. Now, just as Claude Mongeau was asked to review the report for the Transportation Safety Board on behalf of CN Rail, Lisa Raitt was asked to review the report because she was Minister of Transportation under Stephen Harper, and she was asked to provide her input for the Transportation Safety Board in order to provide, accuracy and soundness of findings, etc., for what would become the final report put out to the public. So this letter is very similar to the previous one for Claude Mongeau. Again, you'll notice it has the wrong date on it. Again, an issue for me when it comes to data pulls, if a programmer happens to do a data pull based specifically on a date. But the issue here, though, Jason Clooney died on November 18th, 2013. That's when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. But the deceptions pertaining to this death very much continued under the Trudeau administration, where the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal had a hearing pertaining to Jason's death and would then set extremely nasty precedents, making the work environment exponentially more dangerous for frontline rail workers, in spite of fake qualifications issues pertaining to the training of conductor trainees having been specifically flagged for the Trudeau administration and Transport Canada about 6 months before the very nasty precedents were set under the Trudeau administration. And those were part of a decision by the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal known as 2016 OHSTC 20. So again, Jason died in 2013, and the hearing for the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada did not happen until a good 3 years later. So again, it takes years, and this was I'm sure what Transport Canada and the Transportation Safety Board considered a pretty easy one to write up. Who's going to care about some guy who dies in the middle of a wheat field when the death looked like such an obvious mistake on the part of the trainee? And folks, when we get into those issues, you are going to see that, in my opinion, it was criminal negligence on the part of the rail carriers and Transport Canada that truly, truly led to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. So things are not always as they seem, and that's why sometimes you really have to dig a little deeper. So again, just as I did previously for the letter that went to Claude Mongeau, this is just the second page for the letter that went to then Transport Canada Minister of Transportation, Lisa Raitt. So it's just the completion of that letter. And on this one, you can actually see the names of the people that also received this letter. Some of them I know are at Transport Canada. These other two, I'm not quite sure where those are. But if anybody knows what those acronyms mean, shoot me off an email, because I would certainly love to know what those acronyms mean. I couldn't find that. And I guess we'll go from there. Thank you. All right, so in the information that I was provided, again, via the Access to Information request, there was also this page. And again, I provide the page number at the bottom there. But if you look at this page, it has to do with planning and managing investigations. And this is a document, again, for the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. And what's very interesting here is the part that says criminal acts. And it states, criminal acts uncovered during an investigation need immediately to be reported to the applicable law enforcement agency and to the Chief Rail Investigations at the Rail/Pipeline Investigations Branch. In cases where an occurrence is believed to be the result of criminal or unlawful activity, the law enforcement agency investigation activities shall take precedence over those of the Transportation Safety Board. The Transportation Safety Board assigned investigators may offer technical support to police if requested with approval of the DOI. I don't know what that acronym means, But what's interesting here is, I did request a copy of police reports, anything from the RCMP, whatever. And there was only a few pages, and it was all blanked out. Nothing was provided, basically. So, if there were criminal acts, why were there never any people charged at very high levels, given the clear violations of so many laws in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney? So I really wonder what was reported to proper authorities or law enforcement. And if anything, in my opinion, nothing would have ever come of it. Given that I don't believe anybody was charged in this death. His parents would have absolutely known that if somebody had been charged in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And I spoke to his parents for 3 years. And the first time that I met them and asked them, "What have you been told about your son's death?" they told me nothing. We've been told nothing. They had been kept completely in the dark as to what had happened to their son. So I do not believe that proper criminal investigations were done in matters pertaining to the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney. And I absolutely do believe there were definitely reasons to believe a lot of laws were being violated, and there definitely could have been an argument for criminal negligence causing death in the death of this particular young man, who had 2 young children, by the way. So that's a whole other issue. But again, when I look at what I consider rail partners in crime, I got to tell you, there's a lot of organizations that to me would fit under that category. Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, RCMP. If you're hiding facts pertaining to violations of the law, in my opinion, you are a rail partner in crime. And conspiring to hide crimes, that too is criminal, as is breach of public trust and financial fraud. Because again, if you are a rail investor and you've got some pretty major companies investing in the rail industry, like we're talking large multi-billion-dollar equity funds that invest in the rail sector, wouldn't you want to know who's running your companies, and if maybe they had some pretty nasty skeletons in their closet that should not have been hidden? Because those things do have a way of popping up and being revealed. I can't remember the specific verse, but I know it's in Matthew, and the Bible states, "There is nothing hidden that shall not be revealed." And I absolutely believe that to be true. Anyways, so as we keep going here, let's see, it says when they're talking about regulatory infractions, so those would be violations of acts and regulations, okay? So it says normally regulatory infractions uncovered during an investigation need not be specifically reported to Transport Canada. Rather, the problem may be brought to the attention of the on-site senior railway officer. Really? So who is that on-site senior railway officer? The train master? Who would that be? CN Rail Police? Why would that not need to be reported specifically to Transport Canada? Transport Canada is there to enforce all acts and regulations, not just those that they would like to enforce. So if there's violations of acts and regulations that pop up during an investigation, as surely had to be the case in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, why would those not be reported to both Transport Canada and the RCMP? Because the RCMP has federal jurisdiction over the railway system in Canada, And yes, there is the CN Rail Police. There is Rail Police, and some people say they're the only ones who have jurisdiction over accidents in the rail sector. That's up for debate, I guess, in groups. But make sure that you look at my video on the RCMP and CN Rail Police, and or really any rail police, in my opinion, because they, in my opinion, cannot be trusted in rail worker death investigations. And that, folks, is a must-view video that I will be doing for all rail families, including not only frontline rail workers and their loved ones, but also, rail investors, rail customers, anybody, because there needs to be an overhaul here when it comes to the investigation of incidents in the rail sector. That is so long overdue. Now, when we think of rail families, there's a lot more than just frontline rail workers and their loved ones. Those are clearly the obvious rail families, but there's a lot more that I've decided to include in what I call Rail Families United. For example, as an MA in finance, I always follow the money, honey. And so rail investors, that's another large group that, if you're a rail investor, would you like to know that the people running the company are people of integrity and people who value their workers, people who, you could trust to do the right thing at all times? And rail investors, they include not just large equity funds today. We're talking multi-billion-dollar funds, and then a lot of times they manage pension funds also. But you've got also the rail workers themselves who, if they invest in their own company stock for their pensions or whatever, they too are rail investors. And so they have a lot at stake here. But we're talking here for rail investors, some of the biggest players on the financial markets, or that move the financial markets, definitely invest in rail. Then you've got rail customers. Rail customers include pretty well every industry. You've got, first of all, passenger rail, which has to share the tracks with freight trains, and commuter trains. In the States it's Amtrak, in Canada it's Via Rail. Well, they don't have their own training facilities for conductors and locomotive engineers. Their workers are pretty well, like in Canada for Via Rail, they take their workers from CN or CP Rail. And the same thing with commuter rail, like at the provincial level, for example, GO Transit in Toronto or Ontario Northland. Those are provincial, but they also have an issue here. They also have an interest in understanding the issues here, because there's also provincial crown corporations or, state commuter trains that can run in the States. There's the agricultural sector. But just a second. So if I go back to the commuters, and all of these sectors here as far as rail customers, would you like to at least make sure, if you are a rail customer, that the people at the controls are properly trained? And that's going to be a huge issue when it comes to what's making the rail industry much more dangerous. We're going to be covering a lot of information on how rail workers on the front lines are properly trained or not. And that's an issue I call fake qualifications in the rail industry. So now, another big sector would be agricultural products that get shipped by the rail industry. So if you're in the agricultural sector, shipping grain, canola, corn, oil, livestock, equipment, or parts, would you like to know that the people at the controls or running the train have been properly trained? Same thing for the automotive sector. Also is a huge customer for the rail industry, as is the chemical industry. And here it's even more important because so many hazardous materials are shipped via rail, such as sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, hydrogen cyanide, I believe, is also shipped by rail, chlorine, So you want to make sure that you've got the best people, the best trained people, and it's not that the people aren't the best. Because a lot of them, quite frankly, don't know they've been fake qualified. And we're going to go through that. But anyways, the next one would be forest products. Logs, lumber, paper, plywood and OSB, telephone and hydro poles, railroad ties, wood chips. Again, tons of forest products are shipped via the rail sector. Heavy equipment for construction, for commercial applications or industrial, or for the military. Then you've got mining, bauxite, coal, iron ore, potash. All of that stuff also gets shipped via the rail sector. And you've got, of course, oil and energy products, such as bitumen, which is the really heavy oil that comes out of, say, Alberta and heads over to the U.S. Where it goes into processing facilities down in the U.S. You've also got hydro turbines, solar equipment, pipelines, windmills. All of that stuff can be shipped via rail. You've got retail goods of all kinds, things that you find at Walmart, things that you find at Best Buy, Costco, whatever, mostly gets shipped through the rail sector. Then you've got the shipping and international freight also impacted. Stuff that goes, one time my son and I we had taken a ferry across the St. Lawrence Seaway, and on the other side, my son's autistic and he just loves trains. And we happened to be sitting there on the ship, on the ferry, waiting to head back across the St. Lawrence Seaway. And off to the right, there was a ship there for CN Rail. And a train literally was loaded from the ground right onto this CN Rail ship. They didn't offload the cars. It just literally went from one track right onto the ship. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So shipping is also, be it on ships or on the tracks or via trucking, very, very, very closely tied to the rail sector is the trucking industry. And then you've also got things like steel that gets shipped via rail. So rail customers are numerous and across all kinds of industries. So if you're a rail customer, here's a big issue for you. Let's say you're a grain elevator and you're a mine site for potash. The trains literally will come onto your site to load up and then leave. Well, would you like to make sure that the people running those trains are properly qualified and ensure that rail carriers have not been hiding some serious issues which may impact your costs, the safety of your own workers on your sites, etc. Then another rail family I included here is that of regulators in both Canada and the US. Not all regulators are bad, but a few bad apples at the very top can make the whole bushel of apples rotten. So those that I have talked to in Canada, or that I've sent files to, is Transport Canada. They've received numerous files, and here I mean the Minister of Transportation for Canada. Been on board for years now on these issues, but boy, you sure don't see anything on this in the press. Same with in the U.S., those who've received my files included the Federal Railway Administration and the Surface Transportation Board. You've also obviously got, pseudo-regulators at the Transportation Safety Board and the National Transportation Safety Board in the States. I have not communicated with those two groups specifically because they're supposed to be independent and, make reports that don't put blame on anyone, when actually, if you really read those reports the way they're written, I think you'll disagree with that, we're not, placing blame anywhere, we're just putting out the facts. Absolutely not true, in my opinion. Another group would be the unions, and again, I'm going to have to do a separate video just on unions, and if you're a union leader, involved in any way in the rail industry, you're going to want to look at those because there are some serious implications for unions tied to the rail industry here. The unions that I have dealt with primarily would be the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference. They roll up to the Teamsters, which is based out of the U.S., and the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. They've received a lot of my files. I actually went to Ohio in April, end of April 2024, before J.D. Vance was selected to be President Trump's running mate. I made a rather productive trip to the U.S. to disclose to key groups some of the issues and files that I had uncovered over the years. And one of those groups that I went to see in person was definitely the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, based out of Ohio. Another union that received some of my files would be SMART-TD. That's a conductors union in the U.S. for conductors. The Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way employees, those are your track maintenance guys. I've only sent them files over the internet. Same with SMART-TD, only over the internet. The Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen is another union. I have not had really any dealings with them, but I'm just trying to show here that there are numerous unions and workers which can be impacted by all the issues we're going to be discussing here. Because, you know, if you're a railroad signalman and you're working out there on the tracks, again, you'd like to know the people at the controls were properly trained and have the right qualifications. And a big issue that we're also going to discuss there is managers at the controls. That's a big one, folks, and that's going to require a separate video also by itself. Let's see, and things like the United Steelworkers, another union tied to the rail industry. They do the bridge repairs when bridges are out of, you know, steel and whatever. So the United Steelworkers has rail workers. And there's several others. The Railroad Workers United, that's kind of a different type of union. I think that was started by workers who probably felt they weren't getting proper representation, would be kind of my take on that union. That they, I think, didn't feel their issues were being properly addressed via other unions, and so they kind of formed this separate group, Railroad Workers United. And the thing I like about them is that they have a list on their website of all the people who have died on the front lines in the rail industry, and it goes back for years. So they clearly have not forgotten rail workers who've been killed. Another rail family that I would include here is the Railway Association of Canada and the Association of American Railroads. I have not communicated with either of these. Quite frankly, when it comes to the Railway Association of Canada, they help Transport Canada to come up with things like new training programs. They are kind of a pseudo-regulator, and in my opinion, very much part of the problem when it comes to what's going on in the rail industry in Canada. When you have executives from the rail industry, you know, part of the regulatory bodies and, you know, working pretty closely with regulators at Transport Canada, etc., helping to do training programs and rewrite rules and regulations and whatever. You know, personally, from what I've seen, I have a huge issue with some of what's going on when it comes to regulators for the rail industry in Canada. And I just suspect it may very well be the same in the U.S. And when you think of the Railway Association of Canada, and it's the same thing in the U.S., the Railway Association of Canada doesn't just include Canadian rail carriers. It includes any carrier operating in Canada, including the Class 1 rail carriers from the U.S. So, you know, Amtrak that operates in Canada, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, you know, CPCN, CSX. If they're operating in Canada, they also can be part of the Railway Association of Canada. I think you just pay your membership fee or whatever, and you're part of the association. But don't think that just because it says the Railway Association of Canada, that that only represents Canadian railroads. It doesn't. It represents pretty well all the Class 1 rail carriers. There's about 7 of them. And, 50 to 60, smaller railroads, are also represented by the Railway Association of Canada. And the same type of thing applies to the U.S. Association of American Railroads. That association includes Canadian railroads operating in the U.S. Okay, so yeah, they're part of rail families, and I guess I include them here so that they know this channel is now going to be one that they may want to watch. Because the gig's up as far as what's been going on in the rail industry. And we're going to be forcing change. There's too many rail families here not to force change. There are too many interested players with too much at risk. Then you've got rail safety advocates. Whenever there's a derailment, like in East Palestine, Ohio, you get a whole bunch of new rail advocates on board because now we've been personally impacted. But there's a lot of people in the general public, who are very concerned about rail issues because they too are seeing more and more derailments and dangerous derailments with dangerous goods and whatever. So rail safety advocates also would have a great interest in this channel, as would taxpayers, because if you're paying for garbage investigation reports, garbage investigations, garbage hearings, and those hearings can set extremely nasty precedents for those on the front lines in the rail industry, there's a problem with that. So if you're, a taxpayer, general public, news agencies, again, you would be very interested in what is going to be disclosed on this website. And then you've got, rail fans. These guys are called, there could be women too, but I think they're mainly men. But anyway, foamers. Rail enthusiasts are people that just love the rail, watching trains and whatever. And again, it's a public safety issue for these guys too. I mean, if you're pretty close to a rail, a train that's going by, you might stand a little bit further back if you knew some of the issues that are going to be disclosed on this website. So again, the rail families are numerous, and you need to think as a rail family, we need to build strong ties through some very hard truths in order to force change in this industry. And the best way to force change is to follow the money, honey, and make it so that the players have a huge interest and a lot of money on the line when it comes to these issues. And that's what's going to be going on with this site, M&MA in Finance. And it's like I've told numerous people that, I can be your strongest ally or your worst nightmare, because as an MA in Finance, I know exactly how to follow the money and how to make it extremely painful financially if you don't address these issues. So I guess that's what I'm going to leave it at for this slide, and we'll go from there. So this concludes my introduction to Rail Families United. I will be downloading some files at railfamiliesunited.com in addition to the various online YouTube and other video files that you'll be able to find. So I hope that you'll all decide to like, share, subscribe this channel with everyone that you know, because these issues truly impact all of us. So have a great day, and hop on board for the ride. It is sure not to be a boring one for you. Have a great day.